if I have like a deep message inside me to share with people, that's my message. Is if you want to get noticed, instead of you saying notice me, start by first noticing other people.
Hey, podcaster, if you are looking to grow your podcasting community and to learn tools and systems to improve your organization or your workflow, as well as learn the latest details and must-sees at the upcoming Podcast Movement Conference, hold tight because we are going to dive in and give you a ton of answers on this episode. Welcome to Podcasting Made Easy. I'm your host, Christine O'Donnell, a journalist, podcast producer, and media coach. This podcast is a resource for podcasters that breaks down what it takes to launch a podcast and grow that podcast brand and business. So let's get you started. We are recording, we are rolling, so let's go. From here on out, everything is on the record.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, Jared, thank you for being on Podcasting Made Easy. Jared Easley is the co-founder and co-organizer of Podcast Movement, the largest podcasting conference in the world. It's happening this August. He's also the host of Starve the Doubts podcast and the author of the book, Stop Chasing Influencers. So you're busy.
All of that is true. And I was hoping that maybe just for this one episode, we could call it Podcasting Made Easily, but we don't have to do that. But even if you don't do that, I like the name of your show, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you.
This is the Podcasting Made Easily podcast brought to you by Christine O'Donnell and Jared Easley. Thank you, everyone, for listening. So today, we're going to talk about organization, about workflow. And Jared, I imagine you are someone who needs to be organized and have a sense for strategy and protocol when it comes to your schedule. I know a lot of new podcasters out there may be nervous or intimidated or overwhelmed by the idea of planning out a podcast production schedule, a book, and or balancing all of that with their life. You've gone as far as to co-organize this convention that's grown year after year. And what has all of that been like for you?
You mentioned a word that I want to point out, and you said co-organize. And I really want to stress that because some of these things that you mentioned can be overwhelming for some. This idea of how in the world am I ever going to just tackle, this or accomplish that. And I get that. And one of the things that I found is so important is this idea that you don't have to do everything yourself. And that's a really hard thing to process for some. And I hope that we can kind of unpack that a little bit. But the lesson that I learned early on is that I'm not Superman. I can't do everything. I do have certain skills. I do have certain strengths. Some of those are better than others, and it's okay. And if I'm not perfect at everything, that's okay. But that doesn't mean that I can't collaborate with other people that do have those types of strengths and those skills. And in doing so, that creates more community. It creates more opportunity to do something that has a greater impact. And so my encouragement and hope for people is embrace your strengths, but also recognize the areas that you aren't strong at. And then that's where you can potentially reach out and collaborate with other people. Or if you're in a position down the road to have a team, you can have a team where your team members are offsetting some of the things that you aren't very strong at. So when you said co-found, that's exactly right. Like, there's no way on my own efforts or my own abilities that I could try to go out and create an event that Podcast Movement has become. I could not do that on my own, and I wouldn't pretend that I could do that on my own. I have a business partner named Dan Franks. We've worked very, very hard over the last several years to get to the point that we're at now. We're in a position now where we are hiring staff. Like, that's a crazy thing to me. Like, I can't believe we got to that level, and that's not a brag or a vanity announcement. It's just been very strategic, and I credit a lot of that strategy to Dan. I tend to be more the big idea kind of person, and then the implementation, I need a little help with, and that's okay. So I think to summarize my answer for your question is, yes, things can get busy, but when you have a collaborative spirit and you're not attempting to try to do everything yourself, because you know what your lane is and you know where your strengths are and you know what needs to happen there, you can work with other people that can hopefully offset the areas that you're not strong in. That's my hope, is that people will listen to that and hear that and consider how they can apply that and what they're doing and what they feel led to do.
So, Jared, what you're telling me is that you're not very organized?
If my business partner was on here right now, he would laugh and crack up and be like, I have a degree of organization because I think you have to, no matter, what you're doing. So to say completely that I'm disorganized, that's an opinion. There might be some that would, like my wife, for example, that would laugh and be like, yes, he's disorganized. I'm not so disorganized that I can't accomplish certain tasks. You mentioned the book. You mentioned, some things. So I'm not hopeless, but I don't also pretend that organization is the number one thing that I'm great at, and that's okay too. That's all right. It takes a little bit of everybody. So that's why, again, it's so important that if that's not your particular strength, and for me it isn't, then you are connected with or have help from people who do have that ability and do have that skill. And that way things can make progress and you can continue to do the work that you are being led or feel that you should be doing.
I would love to talk about any systems or tools that you might use to organize what your podcast, what it took to organize your book. Do you feel comfortable talking about those things?
Yeah, sure. We talked about, you just mentioned a few things. So,
well, let's start with the podcast, because you made a switch here from how many years ago now was it?
I've been doing the show for 6 years. So
6 years.
6 years, which is crazy. But one of the reasons I think that the show has lasted as long as it has is because of a number of switches, like you said. There's been periods where I've just been so busy with other things that I had to allow myself the grace to take a pause and not be so worried about the podcast. So I'm hoping that's a message that people receive as well, is you can do what you can do, and then there's seasons where life happens, and when those things happen, it's okay to take a break, and you communicate those breaks the best you can with your the people that are gracious and willing to listen to your show, and so that's what I do. There are times when I'm not putting out a podcast every week. I'd like to, and I want to, and I intend to, but when seasons get busy, I just accept the fact that this is a podcast, and that's the beauty of podcasting. Podcasting is flexible. It is on demand, and you can take a break, and you can put out shows in a certain whatever format that you want. You can do it every other week, or if you need a break, you can take a break. Now, you don't want to alienate the people who listen, and you don't want to miscommunicate that with them. So I do think communication is important. But for the podcast itself, I have a very simple process that I follow. I have people that help me with that as well. I have an editor. So that was one of my big lessons that I learned when I started the show, was I was not strong or good at editing. And that was a hindrance for me. So in order to be consistent and do a show that was relevant and that would come out in a reasonable time frame, I needed help with the editing. So I went through a series of finding people. I found a college student who just needed some extra, cash, and that was my first editor. Was a student at the University of Baylor who was in a band, and he just had experience editing audio. And so he was my first editor for, I don't know, probably like 40 episodes or something. And then his price point was going up a little bit, and that's fine. And I ended up deciding to work with another person. And so I found another person. Now I've worked with that person, this whole time. So, it's been almost like 5 years or whatever. But yeah, that's the podcast. And I like to keep things as simple as possible, whether it's a podcast, whether it's writing a book, whether it's, putting on some type of event. I don't try to overthink things. And so for me, let's talk about the book for a minute. The book was co-written, the one that you mentioned. I've actually written 2 books. The first book was my first attempt at a book, and what that was a presentation. So it started out as a webinar. It was done for a group that we know, and the reception of that content was very positive. And somebody actually made a comment to me like, that's a book. And I'd never even thought like that. And I thought, maybe if I could just kind of write that down, what was done in the presentation, that could be repurposed into a book. So I started thinking along those lines, and somebody gave me some reasonable advice one time. If you're ever considering writing a book, it is, let's pretend we went to Starbucks and I said to you, Christine, tell me about this. And we're only going to be there for half an hour or whatever. So what are the 3 major things that you would tell me at Starbucks about that topic? And if you can kind of, in your mind, map that out, and you can say, okay, well, if I'm going to write or I'm going to talk about this particular topic, and I've got 3 major things that I want to say about this topic, what would those 3 things be? And then what would I say, about each of the 3? So when I got that advice, that's kind of how I structured that first book. Was like, okay, I already had a framework from the presentation, and I decided, okay, let me take that content, let me pretend like I'm just talking with someone over coffee, and that turned into book number 1. And book number 1 gave me the courage to attempt to write again, which was a co-written book with book number 2, which you mentioned. So I've written 2 books, and I have every intention of writing more. But my business partner actually asked me, he said, don't write any more books right now. Let's focus on the event. And so we decided, okay, yes, I'm going to pause on the books and just work on the event. And so at some point, I'll get back into the writing because I do enjoy it. I write our weekly newsletter every week. And so I kind of continue to scratch that writing itch if there is one. But I wouldn't pretend that I'm actually great at writing. I think the thing that I've enjoyed is just kind of learning how to tell stories and get whatever point or message that you need to share that message, and then share it in an analogy or a story, and then don't overthink it. So that's my advice there is consider the Starbucks analogy is how you can have a conversation with someone, and in that conversation just kind of basically share what the book is, and then kind of write that out, make that your framework or your outline, and then kind of build on that. So, and then we go into events.
Well, that's kind of
but
the same,
I can pause if you have a follow up there.
Well, I was just thinking that's kind of the same for a podcast. If you're interested in starting a podcast and you're trying to think, what can I talk about? What do I care about? How do I organize this podcast? What is the topic going to be? You can use that coffee analogy.
Yes.
What is something I'm passionate about? What are 3 things I can tell you about what I'm passionate about? And then you can break it down so it seems simpler.
Yes. Anytime you can try to make it as simple as possible, that will hopefully give you the courage to go ahead and move forward. There's so much paralysis by analysis, and the way to navigate that, I found, is to have people around you who are supportive, and also don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Try to think simple, and usually simple is good enough to get started, and you can always adjust as you go. But yeah, that's my take on especially like podcasting and writing books. Now events can be more complex, and so
I want to hold off on the event just 1 second.
Sure.
I have another follow-up for you.
Please.
So your podcast is the Starve Your Doubts podcast, which is overcoming self-doubt and fear management, interviews with successful entrepreneurs who have starved the doubts, moved into self-confidence, and are making their dreams, their business, and passion a reality, and how you can do it too. I was just listening to your latest podcast. I believe it was with Mr. Finn,
Yes.
And it was great. It was insightful to hear his journey. But I'm also curious about your journey from, going from the software industry into podcasting. How did you make that switch? And were you scared?
Part of it was forced. So I did all the things that you're supposed to do in a typical day job project management role. And that company, unfortunately, wasn't doing very well. So this was December of 2013. They let 10 people go like right before Christmas. And I was one of the lucky winners. And I remember having that conversation with my manager and with HR and just kind of baffled, like, I did everything right. I came to work. All the clients love me. They send emails saying they love me, why am I, that drive home was a pivotal moment for me because number one, I had to call my wife and tell her what happened. And then number two, it was just like this gut punch, like, I don't want to, if I can help it, I don't ever want to feel like that again. And I remember in my drive home from work that day, that last day, thinking, if I can help it, I will never have a job again that I don't have control over. Now that's ambitious, and that didn't happen for several more years, by the way. But that was the pushing point for me to really say, okay, I believe in myself and my abilities enough that I'm going to give myself a chance to try to responsibly build whatever's next. And for me, that wasn't right out of the gate. Like most people say, okay, I want this, entrepreneur lifestyle, and maybe they don't quite realize how long that can take to create. For a lot of people, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And that was certainly true for us. And what happened was I needed to have a flexible position that brought in the income I was losing from the day job to give me the flexibility to work on the dream or work on the business. And so that's what I did is I went into a 1099 contract role for a few reasons. I thought, okay, this will give me flexibility. And that was a good decision for me. And so for someone right now who's feeling a little bit stuck, maybe they're in a day job and they want to potentially pivot into something that they want to do full time for themselves, is maybe that initial pivot isn't you just jumping into your own idea. Maybe it's finding a more flexible role in something that you are already skilled in and that people will pay you to do. And if you could do that, that could potentially give you the flexibility to continue to build the thing that you believe that you should be building. So for 4 years, we did Podcast Movement. Now, Podcast Movement didn't happen overnight. It started as a crowdfunding venture. We didn't have money. I say we as Dan, my business partner, and I, we didn't have money to invest into something that would fail. So we did a crowdfunding campaign with no email list, and the odds were certainly stacked. The odds were certainly stacked against us. We reached out to friends. We reached out to people we knew through our podcasts, and we asked them, will you support this? Will you speak at this? Will you share this with your friends? And we had enough people that said yes, that we created this campaign. And we realized, okay, if we can't reach a certain number, let's say $10,000, we have no business trying to create an event. We should not be doing this. So the way that Kickstarter is set up is Amazon takes 10% of whatever you make. And so you have to make, if you say your goal is $10,000, you got to make $10,000, but you don't actually get that $10,000. You get $9,000, if that makes sense. So we launched the campaign, and then 30 days later, we had over $30,000. So we had hit the $10,000 barrier in like the first day, which was pretty awesome validation. Outgrew 2 different venues in just like that month. We had to find, a third venue, which I remember was funny because our initial goal was like, wouldn't it be cool if we could get 200 people to come to an event? We thought that was impossible. And the first year we had 600. which again, not to brag, that's just what happened. And so there was a lot that we didn't know because we didn't have backgrounds in events going into that first year. So the next couple of years were a lot of learning and a lot of adjusting. I remember one year we had a $40,000 deficit. So we were not only did we not make money, we owed money. And, these were like full-time jobs on top of full-time jobs, if that makes sense. So it was a lot of work. And then to have that much effort and energy and heart put into something, and it not only not produce enough money to be sustainable, but to owe money, that was a hard conversation to have with my business partner, with my spouse. The positive that came from that, though, was we realized, okay, here's some serious areas where we made mistakes. And we identified those mistakes. Okay, why did we lose $40,000? Where did that go? What happened? We identified those major areas where where we made the mistakes, put up guardrails. Okay, moving forward, we're never going to do this. We're going to always do it this way. And we've never had that problem since. Every year since then, we've been profitable. And then it took 4 years for us to do this, basically working on top of full-time jobs. So like a full-time of planning and preparing an event on top of a full-time job, if you can imagine that. Then January of 2018, we went full-time with Podcast Movement. So Podcast Movement's now going into a 6th year. And we say that we're very proud of that, but we're also very grateful because there was a lot of really smart decisions made, and I don't take credit for most of them. Again, that's why it's important to have different people in your path that can help you think through things, help you make better decisions, accountability, so on and so forth. But we made decisions to not pay ourselves in those first 4 years. We took money and put that back into the event until we had a runway for 6 months. We're like, okay, January 2018, we're quitting our jobs. And for 6 months, we're just going to focus on the event. And we've got enough money to pay ourselves for that time period, and we'll either sink or swim. But that was a responsible way to do it because it wasn't reckless. It wasn't just guessing at that point. We had proof of concept. We knew we could last that long. And so that's what we did. We did 6 months, and now, fast forward, we're in mid 2019. So we've been a year and a half of doing this full time. And I'm very grateful to say that because I know a lot of people struggle, and I know a lot of people, don't make it to that point. And I think one of the reasons we made it to that point was it just required a tremendous amount of sacrifice and patience in the beginning. And so that's another bit of encouragement I hope that people will take today is be resilient. You're going to have to navigate the hurdles, the $40,000 deficits, whatever those things are for you. And as you navigate those, continually think and communicate with the people around you, but think about how you can take those errors and you can adjust those and pivot and continue to build. And so I think that's a common challenge for podcasters and business people is they will get discouraged, and sometimes that discouragement will cause them to quit. And that breaks my heart when I see that because I know some people are pretty close. And if they can just kind of weather through another few months or whatever that time period is, they can have it. They can get there. If theirs is doing that full time or whatever their version of success is, they can get that, but it doesn't happen immediately. And so you have to adjust, you have to be patient, you have to be resilient. But those who are willing to do those things, those are the ones who are usually going to see the better opportunities open up down the road. I wish it happened overnight, man. And this is the wrong podcast episode to listen to if you're looking for the overnight. But yeah, that's kind of our story. There's certainly a lot more in between and things, but that's where we're at now. And now we're in a position, I'm really honored to say, we're hiring people. We have multiple staff people that we've hired now that are all in the U.S. and they're part of our team and they're helping us to continue to build. But we didn't hire people until, this year. So we had
Well,
contract folks, but not full-time folks. So
congratulations.
thank you.
You're welcome. That's really exciting to be able to say that this is your full-time gig at this point.
Yes.
And in my opinion, I feel the podcasting industry is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. What do you think?
That's what we're seeing. And I mean, anything could happen, right? But for now, it's exciting. We see more and more people that are interested. I'm hearing less people ask me the question, what's a podcast? Which is pretty awesome. I was just talking to like a Lyft driver the other day, and I asked them, do you listen to podcasts? And they're like, oh, yeah. That most people are now aware of podcasts. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. So I love it. It does seem to be growing. It does seem to be going in a real healthy, positive, upward trend. And so, we'll continue to hope for the best and continue to prepare for that. But yeah, I'm loving it. It's so empowering to see so many people from every type of background and ethnicity, gender, everything, that have the opportunity now to share and they have the freedom to do that. They can talk about whatever's on their mind to talk about. And that's what podcasting's about. And I love that about podcasting. If you love soccer, you can go create a podcast about soccer. For the mom who's feeling overwhelmed or whatever, she can go talk about the different challenges about being a mother. And there's a number of mothers that will find that show and listen to that and relate, and it creates a community. So community is very important to me. And one of the things that Dan and I agreed on a long time ago that I'm really proud of is that if in our minds, if we were going to try and make an attempt to create true community, we could not focus that around us. And so we're in that time frame of the influencer and personal branding, which I have no problem with. But for us personally, we sensed that the right thing for our community was for us not to be the focus. It needed to be the community. We don't even speak at our own event. I know some people are like mortified by that. They're like, well, what do you mean? Why would you not speak at your own event? Well, we agreed a long time ago, if this is a true community event, which we feel very strongly about, then it shouldn't be us on the stage. It should be the community. So there's a lot of decisions that we made early on that I look back and be like, that was the right decision, because now 6 years in, whatever delusions of grandeur we might have wanted or had, like, it's interesting now because we don't get on stage and we're not trying to be the guy. It's almost like that has created an interest anyway. What I mean by that is now people are more interested, I would say, certainly than in the beginning, in what our team is doing, because we're not trying to be in front and take over and look at me. We're not trying that. And the counterintuitive result of that is now people are interested in what we're doing. And so that decision, I think, was wise, because now, not that we're trying to get attention, but there is more interest in what we're doing. But I think it's because there is a legitimate community, and there is, this vibe at Podcast Movement that's very synergistic and very collaborative. And you have a couple of bad apples in there, unfortunately, but for the most part, it's a very generous community. And we don't necessarily take credit for that, but we do feel very strongly that one of the best ways to cultivate that type of environment is to not make it about yourself. And so that's, if I have a deep message inside me to share with people, that's my message, is if you want to get noticed, instead of you saying, notice me, start by first noticing other people. And what will typically happen when you do that is other people will start to say, hey, I appreciate Christine. And when they start to say that, or they start to say, I appreciate this person, that creates a rapport, and rapport over time will yield reciprocity. So I call this building the army. Like we mentioned earlier, if you're by yourself waving, on a soapbox saying, "Look at me," most people won't care. But if you have a lot of other people that say, "I really like Jared," or "I really like podcast movement," or "I really like this," when folks start to hear that over and over again, they start to take note of that. They start to say, "Well, what is it about him or her, or what is it about this organization that is so special that all these people are talking about it?" And so, yeah, in short, that's what I try to encourage people to do is if you want to get noticed, start by noticing first. That creates rapport. Rapport over time yields reciprocity, and you get a lot of people that will begin to start saying, "We love this." And when they say "we love this," more people notice that. It's like the army. You've built the army. When an army marches through a city, people notice the army. But if you're by yourself, they probably won't notice you. So build the army. And the best way to build the army is to start by noticing. So,
Jared, thank you for sharing. And speaking
sure.
of your community, a wonderful resource that you've created is that Facebook group, community group, podcast movement Facebook group. I find there are so many very generous people there answering questions. My cat just joined me. Say hi.
Hey.
And there's just so many generous people in that Facebook group, and always answering questions or giving helpful advice, helping people figure out how to promote their podcast or what app they should use to record this or that. And I mean, I've really appreciated and learned from it as someone who has launched podcasts for others and seen success. I found myself looking to your Facebook group for advice and for value. And so,
Yeah, there's a lot of Facebook groups out there, and they're all great in their own way. The podcast movement group, as you pointed out, is a constant conversation daily of just what works, here's what I tried, and here's the result I'm finding. And I think when people get in there, they get really excited because it's an oasis in a sense. It's not just one particular type of podcast. It's every type of podcast, and it's every type of person from all over the world that are in there that have that passion for podcasting. And the person who's making a podcast about motorcycles is learning from the person who has a podcast about breweries. And like I said, the mother stay-at-home mom podcast is learning from the podcast about mortgages, which go figure. But those types of circles are overlapping, and I love the conversations. A gentleman just wrote to me privately the other day, and he's like, "Hey, I don't want to brag about this publicly, but I've been working so hard, all these years, and we got an $8,000 sponsorship." And I asked him, I was like, "Can I share this in the group? Because I believe this is going to really be encouraging to a lot of people. I don't have to mention your name." He's like, "Yeah, don't mention my name." But I took a screenshot of the chat without including the name. I posted it, and hundreds of people just, got on there just so happy for this community member. And I mean, the comments were so telling of the generous spirit and how people are just working so hard. And when they see someone else who's doing that, they can relate to that, and they see someone else that has a win, they're genuinely happy for them. And I love that about the community. I'm sure there's a lot of great communities out there, but I think ours stands on its own in terms of the podcasting, the overall scope of podcasting. It is a wonderful group. And if you're looking to learn, or you're just looking to encourage and share some of your expertise and things that worked for you, then that's a good community to consider being, involved in on whatever level you feel is appropriate. But yeah, we're very proud of that group, and it grows every day. I mean, that's another thing. There's challenges that come with that. There's you got to consider things you didn't have to consider before. So,
do you police that group on your own, or do you have someone?
No way. I used to. I have a number of community members that we trust and that want to give back, and they are moderators. And without them, we would not be able to properly administrate that group. But that group because it does have people that are moderating it, and we do have certain rules and guidelines in place. It keeps the conversations, for the most part, being beneficial to the entire community. We have the occasional, like any other group, spam or things like that. We just deal with it the best we can. But overall, it is a collaborative spirit, and it's a wonderful community. So I hope people will take your advice and check it out.
Yeah, it's really great.
And it's free.
It is.
I'd love to move to talking more about podcast movement. It's this August, Tuesday the 13th through Friday the 16th in Orlando, the world's largest gathering of podcasters. And yay, I'm going. But yeah, the schedule, Jared, is insane. There's so many exciting speakers and opportunities and groups. What would you like people to know? It can be overwhelming looking at that schedule.
Yeah, there's no way to attend every session. It's impossible. So what we encourage people to do is kind of look at the schedule and kind of map out what you can do that through the app or through the website. And we'll have a printed schedule, of course, on site. But you can kind of look through the schedule and determine, okay, what are the areas that I want to focus on for the show for this next year, or for whatever you're working on, whatever projects. And then you can kind of tailor that schedule based on that. There's just so many different types of conversations that are happening that it's pretty awesome to have so much diversity, so many things to consider. There are some that can get a little overwhelmed by that. And we have a virtual ticket for some of our friends that can't physically be at the event. And so people in Europe and in different parts of the world that can't make it, they enjoy that option for the virtual ticket. But it's also great for the attendee that says, okay, I'm going to go to these sessions, but there's so many other sessions that I want to check out. You can still check them out. You can consider getting the virtual ticket, and then that gives you access to all of the videos of every presentation, of every session that's available at Podcast Movement. And there's so many good ones that a lot of people do opt to say, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and get that virtual ticket because I want to be able to either A, go back and review the notes from the presentations I went to, and B, I want to check the ones that I couldn't physically be at just because you can't be in multiple sessions at one time. So that's one of the awesome things. And like I said, our community is so diverse now that there's so many different types of shows and so many types of voices that everybody brings a little bit of something different to the table, and we can learn from everybody. And that was one of the kind of the funny stories I'll say from last year is having a lady came up to me. I think she has a podcast about birds, which, bless her, that's probably not the podcast I'm going to first download, but that's her passion and that's what she talks about. And she attended a session that was put on by wrestlers talking about their podcast. And you think, well, that doesn't make any sense, but it actually made a lot of sense because these wrestling guys were talking about the different things that they've done with their show and how they've grown their audience. And I mean, it just blew this lady's mind. Like, she had like multiple pages of notes and walked away like that was the best presentation. Like, who would have guessed the wrestlers, would be this smart and this creative. And but that's a common thing is you might be surprised. You might go into a session and be like, I'm not sure what I'm going to get out of this, and then you walk away with your mind blown.
Mm-hmm.
With all the new ideas and new things that you could potentially implement. And so, yeah, for the person that's saying, oh, this feels a little overwhelming, I get that. It could feel like drinking from a fire hose. But what we suggest is pace yourself and don't allow this need to go and absorb all this information prevent you from just sitting down and chatting with people, because that's one of the biggest opportunities as well, is just meeting the fellow attendees and getting to make new friends. So many new relationships and connections made at Podcast Movement where people say, like, I feel like this is my crew. This is my second family in a sense. And that may seem like far-fetched, but it really is true. Like, you make some of these relationships and these people that are in the trenches just like you are, or for someone who's new that's coming in with no experience, they meet people who can help them think through these first few months coming up with their show. And they are way more prepared and way more confident going into that because of the new friends that they have that they can message or call on. as they run into different situations and questions. And of course, the group that we mentioned already, you can always ask questions in there. But yeah, it's a wonderful event. Of course, I'm biased, but another thing that's really awesome is the big fish come to the event. Again, that's not to brag, but iTunes, Apple Podcast is physically there. They are there. Their whole team is there. Spotify is there. Pandora is there. Google Podcast is there. And the reason I say that, again, not to brag, but it's so important as a podcaster to go and physically meet these people, shake their hands, talk to them. They're there. They have badges on that say who they are and who they represent. You can find them. You can find them in the app, and you can message them. And if they know you and you connect with them, they are in a position to help you. And we've seen this time and time again too, where people who attended podcast movement have done exactly that. Say, okay, I'm going to make an effort to meet, Steve from Apple or whoever it is. And they go up to them and they connect with them. And then next thing you know, 2-3 months later, Apple Podcast has this special feature for this type of category of podcast. And guess who's in that feature? It's the people they met at Podcast Movement. And that's not a mistake. It's who they know. If they know your show and they know you, they're more likely to be willing to support you in that way. They're in a position to do that. And so that's what I tell people is, don't just look at it as an event to learn. Look at it also as an event to connect with people who are in a position that can help you. People have gone to this conference and then they've met other attendees or other exhibitors that are now the sponsors of their podcast. And I remember my friend Rich Jones from Paychecks and Balances. He went to Podcast Movement in Chicago a few years back, and he met someone from FreshBooks and started having a conversation and saying, hey, maybe we could work together. And at that time, his show wasn't quite big enough, but he connected with a person that expressed interest, kept building the show. They had another conversation several months later, and then that became his first sponsor or one of his first sponsors. And that happens. That's a very common story. That's just one story, but there's many stories like that where people are coming and then all of a sudden they're meeting folks. And this is especially true for women podcasters, podcasters of color. It's true for everyone, but it's specifically true for some of these folks that feel like their voice is there's more opportunity for their voice to be heard. Well, there's companies out there that feel the same way as you. They want your show to be found out. They want to tell people about you, but they don't know you and they don't know about you. So if you're willing to put yourself out there and you're willing to go and be humble and be gracious and connect and be generous, that's when these organizations or that's when these podcast companies can say, oh, we know this person. We can promote them or we can sponsor them. And so that's one more reason to consider Podcast Movement is it's the only event where you're seeing those types of things happen on that level. It's pretty amazing. And again, I don't say that to brag, but I just say it because you can't get found if the people who are in the in the opportunity to shine the spotlight on you don't know you. So this is a great way for you to get to know them. And I hope that people consider that as well. If you can come to the event, try to come to the event. It's worth it. It certainly is. So
awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited to be there and learn and meet people. And do you feel that there are any scheduled events or chats that you can't miss this out of all of the things, make sure you go to this event or make sure you see this presentation?
Well, we have strategic new attendee orientations on that first day. Mm-hmm. And so if you're new, I definitely encourage you to go to that because at that, they're going to lay out some different strategies that other attendees have used in the past that have been effective. You're going to also get a chance to network with a lot of people right out of the gate. And these people are the folks that become your friends throughout the conference. And so anything that's networking related, any of the parties, try not to miss them. There could be a temptation at the end of the day. I just want to chill. I'm introverted. Go to the parties anyway. Put yourself out there. I know that can be a little bit overwhelming for some to think about. But if you can go and you can say, no, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to, at a bare minimum, I'm going to go up to somebody I don't know and say, hey, tell me about your podcast. Podcasters love to talk about their podcast. And they will talk to you and they will tell you, and you'll finally be like, okay, I'm good. But it's true. Like you'll make new friends, you'll connect with people. Then all of a sudden they'll be like, tell me about you and tell me about what you're working on. Well, I'm doing this. Oh, you need to meet Stacy. Come here, Stacy, come here. And then next thing you know, you met Stacy, and Stacy was the one person you needed to meet. So I say parties and networking, there's lots of meetups. There's lots of wonderful ways beyond just attending the session or just standing in the hallway or being in the networking area in the exhibit hall. There's other ways to continue to connect, and that's through the parties and through these specific networking opportunities that we have lined up. And they're all on the schedule, and we'll make sure that people know about them through the app and push notifications and through the printed schedule at the event and stuff. But we have an event that's for people that are prospective podcast guests that say, okay, we want to meet podcast hosts and potentially, be considered for their shows. And so we have 2 of those going on. Now there's one, at 8 a.m. the first day and one at 1 p.m. the first day. Mm-hmm. But these are opportunities for people to say, okay, they raise their hand and say, hey, I want to meet podcast hosts. Okay, so we didn't have that last year. We have that this year. So it's constantly evolving. Folks come up with great ideas of, hey, have you considered having this? And so we have women's networking sessions, just a networking session that's just for women podcasters. And that is fantastic. They love it. And it's wonderful. And podcasters of color have their own meetup, and they go and they have a blast and they connect with other podcasters of color. And it just creates all these new relationships and these new ideas and new opportunities. And so there's just so many things like that, just a chance for people to connect that are in the same circles but didn't know about each other. And so that's what I hope people will consider beyond just what a session to attend is make sure you can go to these parties and these networking events.
Jared, you mentioned that you're a big picture guy, like that's your strength. Is this what you imagined 5 years ago?
What we imagined was much smaller. And we had attended another event, and I think 25% of the content of that event was podcasting. The other was like YouTube or blogging or social media. And half the attendees at that conference were podcasters. And so in those conversations, we realized, okay, there should be a podcast conference. That's where Dan and I said, well, maybe we could be the people that start that, even though we don't have any experience in that. So that led to Podcast Movement, and those initial visions were, could we create an event that podcasters would come to and that they would feel comfortable at? And, that evolved. Can every podcaster of every type of, category be at this, not just these specific categories? And so, yeah, it's evolved. And I think a third of our attendees are, maybe it's a little more than that, but a third of them are probably like the independents. They're the people who record from their couch, Then you have a percentage of attendees that are industry folks. They work within the podcast industry. And then you have another percentage of folks that are people that are broadcasters. They're in radio. And they're coming because podcasting is not going, they can't ignore it anymore. And they're learning, how do we take what we're doing in broadcasting? How do we apply it to podcasting? So we have an entire track that's just for broadcasters that are learning podcasting. So it's a lot of cool circles that are mingling and connecting, and we're all learning from each other. And so, yeah, I didn't expect what it is now, and I don't think that I can expect what it's going to be in the next year or even the next 5 years. But I do know that there's certain recipes that we follow that seem to work. And we've already mentioned a few of them, but one of the major ones is true community. If you are serious about true community in your podcast and the efforts that you're putting forward and whatever you're working on, my encouragement is make that focus about your audience and make it all about them and all about them, not 25% you and 75% of them. Make it 100% about them. And I find that the more you can do that in a genuine way, that tends to create more opportunity and more interest and it seems to be genuine. And so there's, like I said, there's certain recipes that we have in place. We're going to continue to follow them until, we need to adjust. But these are things that they're kind of in our core, are what we believe are essential. And so we stick to those. And as we do that, we see every year more and more people seem to be interested, and more conversations are happening, and more word of mouth, and more people are showing up and saying, let me give this a try. And then they come away saying, that was awesome, and I would definitely go back. So, but that's a hard thing to just create overnight. It's something that's taken several years to build, and it takes persistence and hearing feedback at the end, what worked, what didn't work, and then applying that to the next year. And we don't always get it right. We make mistakes and have to adjust like everyone else. But in doing so, that we've gotten to a point now where it's like, oh, you look at the schedule and you get excited. It's like, oh, look at all this amazing stuff. Well, that amazing stuff exists because of 6 years of figuring out what do people want? What do they like? What do we think is going to resonate? And so, we're constantly evolving in that area. So,
yeah, I do think that, getting feedback from your audience is incredibly powerful when it comes to scoping, what your decisions should be when it comes to podcasting, or, hosting an event, or, almost anything, just getting that feedback, which isn't always the easiest thing to do or ask for. It can be very humbling.
And there are times when you have to ask one-to-one. Just putting out like a blanket ask on Facebook doesn't get any comments. And if you're experiencing something like that, my encouragement then is to continue to be creative. And if you have an email list, write some of those people one-to-one. If you're not sure who's listening at all, have some kind of call to action in your podcast that says, hey, if you're listening right here, just bust out your email. Send me an email at jaredeasley@gmail.com. And in the subject line, just put podcast, or whatever the word is, whatever the word for that episode is. And you'd be surprised. People that are listening will do that, or they'll tweet to you, or whatever it is that you do. But there's creative ways to get feedback, and then just continue those dialogue, or the dialogues with those people, and ask them, what do you like? What do you want to see more of? What do you recommend? And most people will tell you. They'll say what they like. And once you kind of get that feedback, you can adjust, and you can continue, based on that.
Hey, Jared, how did you starve your doubts over these past 6 years?
A super gracious wife, a group of friends that love me even if I'm a loser, even if I completely fail, they love me anyway. And I think when you have those types of relationships and you surround yourself with those types of folks, that it puts you in a position to take strategic and responsible risks. And so I think anyone who's dealing with doubt is, you need people in your circle that believe in you and that want to see you win, and that's sincere. And they don't just answer to you and tell you what you want to hear. And you need those people in your life that'll be straight up with you and say, no, that didn't work. And so that's another form of encouragement is, you need certain folks in your circle, and you got to be selective with who those people are. And as you can trust those people, you confide in them. And I remember a few years ago feeling a little discouraged actually about some of this. I was like, I wish I had a mentor. I wish I had somebody who would just pour into me, and I didn't have that. And I felt like I'm not able to make more progress because I don't have that. And I think what I realized in listening to some podcasts and just kind of thinking through that process was, wait a minute, I'm complaining about not having a physical person to, bounce ideas off of, or to mentor me. But really, there's books, there's tons of podcasts, there's tons of things out there that I can, what can I do rather than wallow in this idea of that I can't. And so for me, that answer was, okay, what podcast can I start listening to? And those are the things that mentor me. You know, what books can I read that are relevant for where I'm at in the moment? And so in doing those things, now it's less about, okay, I need a mentor. It's just like, now I need to know when I need to seek out information and when I don't. So I think that's been very helpful to me. That's helped me starve my doubts, is I've had to just pivot and say, okay, while I may not have this particular person in my life that's pouring into me, I can go listen to a podcast by someone that's really smart and someone who's very generous, and I can listen to that and I can learn from that and I can glean from that, and I can go pick up a book from the library or listen to a book on Audible, and I can learn from that as well. So that's been my strategy is, you know, I have friends that are friends. They don't understand podcast movement. They don't understand podcasting, but they're my friend and they'll listen to me and they'll encourage me. They won't tell me what I want to hear. And then for the deeper stuff, that's where I go and find that through means like podcasts and stuff. Some people go out and hire coaches. You know, those are things that you have a lot of great options. For me, you know, I was like, let me listen to a podcast or let me read a book. And that's been very good. That's been something that's helped me starve my doubts. So, but I think community is essential. You know, you need some people in your circle.
What podcast did you listen to? What book did you read?
Sometimes the podcasts that I listen to are not the intuitive podcasts. And we could rattle off 100 podcasts that are business related that are, you know, some people like and some don't. But for me, some of my ideas and some of my growth have not been podcasts about business. They've been just listening to how a particular show puts together its framework. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts. Like one podcast I just listened to that I really liked was The Dropout. I don't know if you've listened to that, but it has nothing. I mean, it does have some stuff to do with business, but it's about, long story short, about a lady who put out a product and raised a lot of venture capital, and the product didn't work, but she said it worked. And so, you know, this product unfortunately had a lot of impact on people and their health. And so it's kind of a humbling story of this woman who made these promises and had this great ambition. And then we found out a lot of it was fraudulent. And so, yeah, you can always learn from people. You can learn what to do and you can learn what not to do. So that's a podcast that I've really enjoyed recently. I love Business Wars. That's Wondery. That's a fantastic one. If you listen to the Netflix versus Blockbuster series, that one's tremendous. Not everybody knows this about me, but I like professional wrestling. So there's some wrestling podcasts I listen to that I really like. One of those is called Something to Wrestle With, and I love the format of that show. I'm also a person who's, I would say, moderately religious. So there's different like pastors and different people that I listen to that I like. And so, yeah, there's just a variety of different shows that I listen to. And in listening to these different shows, I get different ideas. I get different wisdom depending on, you know, what the topic is. And so, yeah, it's a lot of random stuff. If people look through my podcast, they'd probably be surprised. They'd be like, I didn't expect you to listen to that. But yeah, I love to listen to new shows. I'm constantly looking for new shows. In fact, that led me off topic. That led me to Chernobyl. That's the show on HBO. But I didn't know it was a show on HBO. I just saw the podcast first. I started listening to it just because I was curious. And then it's like, oh, this is a, you know, companion to the TV show. So once I started listening to it, I was like, oh, God, so I need to watch this on HBO. So I went and watched the show and listened to the podcast at the same time while I was listening, you know, watching the show kind of, you know, after the fact. And it's only 6 episodes, I think. So it's a short podcast, but it's very good, especially if you watch the show along with it. So there's all types of things that'll capture my attention. I'll check it out. And, but I've never really get asked that question, so that's a good question. So.
Well, you forgot the book.
My book? Let's see. Okay, a book that I've been reading lately is not the intuitive books. It's been Larry McMurtry, Lonesome Dove, which takes like, if you just listen to the audiobook, it takes like almost 30 hours to listen to. And but I heard somebody talk about it, and I was like, I need to check this out. And it's some of the best storytelling. It's a Wild West story. I mean, it won like the 1986 Pulitzer Prize or whatever. And then the follow-up book to that is Streets of Laredo. So I just finished listening to that. So I know these are not answers. People are like, what are these books? You know, this guy's crazy. You know, I do listen to on occasion or read, you know, business books. And one of my favorites, of course, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think that's one of my favorites because I need that. I need that so much because I deal with so many different personalities, and sometimes I'm not the most gracious person. So I try to read that once a year. That's the book I try to always read every year, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I'm hoping that someday I'll actually be better at that. So, but anyway.
If I keep reading it, it'll sink in.
Yeah, my business partner is always like, you know, we get these different support requests and questions, and some of them just make you like, what is this person thinking? What is this person doing? And so that reading that book helps me be more gracious in my responses to people. So if anybody ever writes a support request and I answer it and I'm kind of short, you can be like, hey, time to read How to Win Friends and Influence People, and then we'll have a laugh, and I'll say you're right. So
your mission, your community mission might be helping. It might be part of the book sinking in.
I think so too. It's a winning strategy. It's a long-term strategy, but it's a good one.
Speaking of strategies, I am curious because the topic of this podcast, I would love to bring it back to organization, to help people with their organization skills. Do you feel comfortable sharing what tools you use on a daily basis to stay organized, whether it's like Google Calendar or
right.
we
definitely use Google Suites, so Google Drive, Google Calendar, and then, you know, internal communications, we use Slack, which is amazing because that kind of keeps everybody focused and chatting. Asana, you know, for project management, so that really helps to keep our task clear and just make sure that I'm not missing stuff. So I told you, I'm not like the most organized person, but there's tools that help you with that. And Asana is one of them. It's amazing. It's robust, and just so many cool opportunities that you can do. So we've mapped those out. We've got different tasks that we have and that we check through Asana, and it kind of keeps us going and keeps us aware of what's coming up. Google Calendar, of course, as you mentioned. And then we use a number of other tools that are like for our email marketing and stuff that's, you know, great. Like ConvertKit is awesome. And, you know, there's a number of resources that we have that I love. One resource that most people won't consider is in Google, in Gmail. Let me just pull this up real quick. This is, pardon me while I look this up real fast. This is something that I love and I use it fairly often, but it basically is mail merge. So for an example, there's a lot of scenarios where I need to email, let's say, 50 people. And I could just create like that list in ConvertKit or something and send that out. But what I'll do is I'll use mail merge with Gmail, and I can create one draft, and then I can have a spreadsheet that has everybody's name and their email address. And then I can send that out via one-to-one, meaning an email that's to each person individually. And it looks like it's for me and it's individual. It's just for me, and it is for me. But I can send out 40 of those, for example, or 200 or whatever that number is, within, you know, certain range. I can send that out, and so that tool is super effective. Like I use that, you know, probably a couple times a month. So that's one of my favorite tools that maybe may not immediately be on the radar for everybody. But if you need to send out a smaller batch of emails to people for whatever it is, I like the mail merge feature through Gmail.
Do you feel email marketing was a big like game changer for you?
Yeah. And another thing, okay, so since we're talking about this, I don't mind sharing this, but like our podcast movement Facebook group, when we get a new member request from that group, we ask them, hey, what's an email address that we can send you a welcome email to? We don't require that someone fill that out, but most people do. So we take that email and we add that to our email address or to our email list. And so it's been kind of a neat way for us to help grow our email list is by people that want to join our Facebook community. And so, yeah, that's email marketing is without a doubt very important and something that helps us continue to keep the word out there of what's going on, of what's coming up, how people can be involved, and just making sure everybody is aware of what's happening. And so, yeah, we love it, and certainly know we're not naive. We know that it's a necessity, and so we've got different tricks and different things that we do to continue to grow that list. But one of them that has been awesome is when people join the Facebook group, we ask them for an email to send them a welcome email and then a series of emails. Of course, they can always unsubscribe if they choose, but that's been an awesome way that's helped us to grow our email list, is simply doing one little thing like that. Again, there's several things we do, but that's one of them that's been effective. So
wonderful. I thank you for sharing that. I think that it'll really help people as they move forward in their podcasting journey. Before we head out, is there any last podcasting made easily tips that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of trying things that are different. So let's say you're hosting a podcast, for example, and it's an interview-based podcast. I like the idea of maybe you invite a friend to co-host with you. One of the reasons I like that is then they're honored to be a part of the show, and they are one of the first people in most cases to promote that episode when it comes out. And so I've tried so many variations of this over the years, and it's very effective. So if I have the option to just sit down with Christine and do an interview, of course I'm going to take that opportunity because it's Christine, right? But there's some scenarios where maybe I'm not interviewing Christine. I'm interviewing Stacy. And, well, okay, how do I maximize that interview with Stacy, especially if I don't know Stacy? Well, one way that you could do that is you could be like, hey, Stacy, I like to have one of your friends co-host the interview with me. And that way we can have a dialogue with someone that you're already familiar with, and you're getting familiar with me. And it just kind of brings about different questions that might not normally come up in the interview. And so I've tried this, and it's very effective, where I would, let's say I'm interviewing Christine, and then I say, Christine, would you like to invite someone to be co-host with me? And you may say yes, you may say no. But if you say yes, well, actually, my friend Stephanie, well, then that gives me a chance to connect with Stephanie, who I didn't know. And then Stephanie, like I said, is usually one of the first people that promotes the episode because you are her friend and she wants to support you and she's excited that she's on a podcast. And so now all of a sudden my podcast episode with Christine got a little bit more visibility because of one little change. And that was the fact that I allowed Christine to have her friend Stephanie co-host with me. And so things like that, not a lot of people try, but it's actually really effective in getting more visibility to your podcast. It's not a sneaky thing. It's not contrived. You can make it that way, but yeah, in no way, there's really no manipulation. It's just saying, hey, Christine, would you like to invite a friend to co-host? She has the option to say yes or no. If she says yes, then you can connect with that friend, and that friend is excited, and then they end up being somebody that helps promote the show. So it's just kind of a natural win-win. And so those are that's one little trick. There's dozens of those, but that's one of my favorites. So
awesome. Mm-hmm. I love it. So creative, Jared.
So if you're not if you're not a podcast interview host, then that necessarily is not going to be the option for you. So a narrative option is, if you're a narrative person, maybe you can weave in your friends' names into the show in a creative way. I've seen people do this, and then they tweet to that person, be like, "Hey, Billy, you may or may not be mentioned in this episode." So creative mentions is another cool thing you can always try if you're just doing a solo show. Strategically mentioning your friends and people, and then tweeting them after the fact and say, hey, you may be mentioned in this episode. You have to check it out. And they do. And then they're like, oh, I got mentioned. So they share it. So there's little ways to get people to participate. I hope people will consider trying some of that. It's fun.
Jared, would you like to drop anybody's name in this podcast?
Would I like to drop anybody's name in this podcast? Sure, I'll drop Jody Mayberry. Jody is one of my amazing friends, and he's a wonderful podcaster. And Donald Kelly is another one. He's the sales evangelist. Those are two people I love, and I'm really proud of their podcasting journeys. So I'll give them quick shout outs. And then Kirsten Oliphant, she's in Houston. The thing I love about Kirsten is while she's a great podcaster, she's an amazing podcaster, she takes on a pen name, and she started writing like these clean romance novels, and she makes a full-time living now just from writing clean romance novels on Amazon. And
what's her pen name?
Emma St. Clair.
Does she mind that you share that?
No, she doesn't mind.
Oh, okay.
No. Kirsten is one of our moderators in our Facebook group, but she's an amazing person. Man, there's so many people to mention. I can't mention them all. There's wonderful people that I love and respect, and I'm really proud of. And then there's other people that I can't say their name, but they just got the $8,000 sponsorship. He doesn't want to be mentioned, but he's very excited about it. So I love seeing these types of stories unfold. And I love seeing people like Donald, who I just mentioned, who's now full-time doing podcasting, and Jody, same thing, full-time. Now Kirsten, full-time writing clean romance novels. Who would have guessed? But that's her thing, and it works, and she's spent several years kind of getting to that point. So anyway, yeah, I could mention more, but we'll start with them.
Well, thank you, Jared, so much for being with me today, and with everyone who's listening. I love all of the tips you've shared, and I'm so honored to share them.
I hope we can still be friends. So.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Check out Christine O'Donnell, folks. She's amazing and humble, and has a great show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, where can people find you, besides in Orlando at Podcasters Movement?
First thing is they should be checking out everything Christine O'Donnell does and find me there, because you're going to find a whole treasure trove of all these other things. But yeah, podcastmovement.com is the event. And then the podcast is Starve the Doubts, starvethedoubts.com. But regardless of whether we ever connect, I hope that you'll consider, the good things that you're hearing on this podcast, and that'll help you to continue to grow your show and continue to do what you feel led to do. And the world needs to hear your voice, and podcasting gives you a platform to do that. So it's a beautiful thing, and I hope that you'll take advantage of it. Not just take advantage of it, but be strategic and grow it as well.
Perfect. Beautiful.
Yep. Podcasting made easily.
With Jared Easley.
With Jared Easley, yeah.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Made Easy. I'd love to learn more about you. What topic would you like me to cover? Who would you like me to interview? Please fill out the survey in the show notes so that I can serve you best. If you're listening on iTunes, remember to subscribe, rate, and review. You can also find me on Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Please share this podcast with your friends, especially if you think they should be podcasting. If you have any other questions or suggestions, you can email me at hello@podcastingmadeeasy.com. You can also find me on social media at @TheChristineOD. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.